Hello everyone and welcome to another video on good old Double Bits Workshop. So in today's video we will be making a quick little rundown on the Workmate that I use quite regularly. It is an older model, but we'll go over that in just a quick second. So stay tuned. So like I said a moment ago, we are talking about the Workmate by Black & Decker. This is one of the older models of it. I actually got this at a yard sale for about $5. So I'm going to preface with that right and foremost. I reference it quite often in a lot of my different videos. I use this quite often as well for interior and exterior use. I constantly end up running with too many projects going on in the workshop, so I have to go outside, and this guy works amazing for that. Just a nice work platform, just a worktop bench type deal outside. And it also is a good height for most sawhorses as well, so if you have larger projects or you just need a quick sawhorse and you are using the two you have, or you don't have a sawhorse and you need something to extend your workbench out for a larger project, this will work great for that as well. It's kind of a end-all be-all universal random placement tool, and I love having it in my shop. So we're going to go over it a bit real quick here. So this is the older model, like I said before, which is usually either like a late 1970s, early 1980s model, noted by the actual more steel and aluminum pieces in throughout the unit and the solid actual plywood that they use on top of it, versus some of the newer models use more like a particle board kind of plywood, so they're a little bit cheaper, but we'll kind of go over that here in a quick second. So like I said, this is the Black & Decker, better known as the WM225, that stands for Workmate of course, or just known as the Workmate. There's a couple different models to them. They have 200s, 300s, 350s, and even a 2000, which is a larger work table that you can fold up in the side of your garage and expand and use it as needed as well. That one I believe has a mild vicing capability, which is these two on top of here that can clamp this wood down either flush, or you can use the inside of this wood to act as a vise, which is what they originally designed it for. So this is folding and collapsible, currently in its collapsed state. I'll show you here in a few what it looks like standing upright. It has 4 legs that fold in here in the back. It's supposed to have 4 of these little swivel heads. Mine, when I got it for $5, like I said, only had 3. I've been able to utilize and do pretty much everything off of 3, but I will say I do have a 3D printer and I will be 3D printing more of these. You can get ABS-like resin for my resin printer, or just any other, I think it's FDM printers can also do it too, with more of a hardened plastic, so you can actually make these. You can purchase them too. There's replacement sites for days for anything Black & Decker. So that's how I got it. It originally had the 3 swivel heads and just the unit for $5. Wonderful deal. They don't quite go for that, sadly. I will state that very quickly. The old original models have actually gone up. So if you were to purchase this old unit on eBay or a couple of different other sites, it can go for as high as $200, sadly. They are a wonderful unit, and that's why the price is that high. I would suggest looking around a bit if you want this one in particular. Alright, so this is the heavy duty unit. It has heavy duty vices on it. Some people have actually utilized the old school version's vices to actually correct mild steel and aluminum. This is actually pretty darn good, and it is 2 chunks of wood that you are vicing together, so you have that ability to not damage or mar anything that you're working on. I've clamped bikes, I've clamped windows in place, I've clamped chunks of steel, and I have used hand tools, chop saws, and other things on top of this utilizing the vices in it. They are pretty darn bulletproof, and even before I had my stools or I had my ladder to get to the upper rafter, I actually stood on this from time to time, and it took my 180 pounds just fine. Not suggested, but you can definitely do it very easily in a pinch if you're 180 plus. The new ones say they're 450 pounds is what their load limit is. I don't know if I would trust it exactly. The new models are a little bit more on the flimsy side, so max peak, not moving or shifting weight, you could probably get away with 450 fine, but if you were to stand out under something, I don't feel it would handle that as well. So in this case, the older one, I'd say wins out in that regard. Alright, so going over some of the stats, like I said before, you have these swivel heads that will just pop in. And the beauty of this is that you have the ability now to clamp the vices down, and you have this kind of like what they call like a dog, or just a swivel lock in place kind of. I'm trying to remember what the other terms are for them, but anyway, these little swivels will lock in place and give you a clamping ability with the two swivel vices to lock in a chop saw. I use this as well to lock in my planer originally, especially whenever I have larger projects going on that are taking up my space around it, but I have a quick little project I need to do that I need to do quickly, and I need to get it out for a gift or for a commission or something like that. I can pull this out, have a worktop without worrying about my two long tables needing the space to work on a larger project. And like I said, I can use this outside. I can set up two sawhorses next to it and make a larger surface table to work, and that kind of expands my shop a bit. And like I said, that is also due in part to the weather. If it's good or not, you can kind of do that just with any kind of situation, whether you're in a garage or not as well. It is collapsible. The one thing is that you still have to give up about a good 8+ inches of space to actually house this somewhere. It is sturdy enough that I can put hooks and hook through the little holes here on the one side, or I can flip it over and use the bottom arm of it to hook onto the wall as well and mount it up. If you have more vertical space rather than horizontal space, this definitely saves you having to have a large table just always open, or a large surface area that even if it is on wheels, you're just constantly giving up that much space of your shop just to have an everyday kind of workaround for it. So I'm going to stand this up real quick and give you an idea of what it looks like expanded outward. So as you can see, it is a nice kind of substantial surface to work with. From what I am reading, the newer models have a smaller surface by a couple of inches. So be forewarned in that one, it's not a huge drastic drop, but just imagine taking a couple inches off of either side. And the material isn't quite as thick or as heavy duty as the old class, but you can, if you wanted to, purchase and have the frame of the new one, and you can change out the tops for some harder kind of either like an oak or a wicker, or not wicker, sorry, a hickory, or something of a more hardwood nature. So that is still definitely in the works that you could do that. A few things to note on the newer models. We'll go over here in just a quick sec. So like I said, I've used this for many projects, so I have a very good working understanding of the benefits of having one and not having one. But let's kind of go over real quick a pros and cons list between the new one and the old one, because if you're looking at this and you're wanting to see if this is a good product for you, just to give you a few things to look out for and a few things to just kind of keep in mind as you are shopping around for one, we'll just kind of go over a few things that I've noticed having this model, being able to look at a few different floor models of the new version of it, and just a little bit of my opinion of it, just to give you kind of an idea if you haven't really been able to delve too deep and you just stumbled across this video. Alright, I will say that this old model, in my opinion, is pretty well bulletproof. I've dropped numerous pieces of stock lumber from my rafters on top of it while it's open like it is right now, and at most I have a few little surface dings on it. Otherwise I haven't really done any major damage. The only damage on this corner right here came from me, I think, dropping my chop saw, and the blade hit and kind of cut a little bit of this corner off. But that's my stupidity and being kind of doof and letting it drop. And the chop saw's fine, it runs great. It just kind of nommed on this corner a little bit. Besides that, the vices work phenomenal. Like I said, I've viced in a bike once before when I was fixing a chain on it. I've also worked with different pieces of larger lumber when I'm cutting them with either a handsaw or if I'm cutting it on a separate surface with my chop saw and I just needed something to kind of help hold a larger board and kind of use the chop saw a little bit more intensively to cut something bigger than it probably should have. But This guy did just fine. I had zero issues or wiggles with this at all. The only wiggles I have now are just from these tops when they're loose and not tightened on anything. That's something that I can go through and just tighten on the bottom. Kind of just neglect on my part, sadly, on that part. So the swivels work pretty nice. The only downfalls I will say is that, dang it, something from 1970s/1980s is starting to get a little loose on how well it clips into here. So these can get that way. You can kind of bend them out. The older ones look pretty good and are nice stout plastic, but the new ones are just a little bit wider from what I can tell, and they do hold it pretty nicely, and they are almost like a little bit more of a rubbery plastic versus this is like hard plastic that you'd find on like a car or something super industrial plastic wise. These are very stout and give no flex whatsoever. So if you are using this as a clamp and you have the old style, you can actually dent in your wood with your project that you're working on with these little feet. They are strong enough to do it along with these vices. That being said, let's kind of go over a few different things. So old version, the strength of it, they are absolutely reliable as all get out. I can stand on this one and feel pretty darn comfortable. No issues or qualms about it. In fact, just to give you kind of an idea, full body weight on it and no problems. As for the new version, what I was able to experience just kind of playing around with one on display, I think it was at Home Depot or Lowe's. They had one that was just like an open box and they had it out as like a display for Christmas, and I was kind of fumbling around with it a bit because I liked this so much. I had the idea and inkling to purchase a second one, which is not a bad idea. I have a small 200 square foot shop, but I just don't have enough wall space to mount both of these up, and I don't use them enough in concordance with each other outdoor project wise that I would feel comfortable needing and utilizing it enough to justify the price. So the con we'll use to kind of counteract that a little bit on the old one is that now they're a little bit more expensive and kind of hard to find. Although that being said, I have seen a few of these pop up for pretty darn cheap. A lot of people end up having them or not knowing exactly what they are, and they'll get rid of them for around like 20 bucks. Upwards you might pay about 40-50 bucks, but honestly for what you get, if you're buying an old one, I'd say it's a pretty darn good deal. But if you don't find it and you do want one of the old ones, you're going to have to pay a bit of a premium for it. There's a small version of this that they sold for a while. It's only that big and has the same mechanisms on it and had the ability to kind of tilt. Those are running for like $225, $250 right now on eBay. So kind of keep in mind these are a little bit more of a good find and also are sought after. Okay, let's go for a pro on the new one. I will say the new ones are readily available and they are looking like they are worth having with some mild modification. Now what I'll kind of expand on that a bit from what I've seen versus this model versus that model is that there's still both the 225 model. Price ranges quite drastically depending. You can get them for as cheap as around like $65 upwards to $95 for the new version. So that still is half the price of finding one of these on eBay. We'll say if you're just purchasing online, shipped to your door, and you don't find an immaculate deal or you want it brand new in the box, you're going to spend around $200 for this model versus the new ones. Let's say at most you'll spend about $95 off of Amazon. When you do get that, some of the things that are a little different is that this is all preformed or cast steel, and there is some bends in it that they have tack welded, but they've tack welded nicely. On the new versions, on here you have a flat piece of steel that's bent with openings in it for this rod to go through, and as that laps over, piece of steel hugs over and then has a light tack on the top part, and then the rod shifts through that to tighten and loosen the top of this vise essentially. On the new models, when you get this fully tight, because they used a thinner gauge of steel, it'll actually flex and bow in if you're trying to do something as drastic as reform a large stock piece of steel or aluminum, like I said I've seen some individuals do with the old school. If you were trying to put that much strain on the new ones, you'll get some bow and flex, and eventually you'll pop that weld. What you can do for that is you can re-tack weld it or run a screw through the side of it that's short enough that it won't interfere with the thread on the inside of this, and it'll work just fine. That'll increase the strength of the unit and it'll get you pretty much up to where this one's at. So you're still at a value at that point if you can only find these on eBay and no one locally has one that you're able to purchase for cheaper, that's still kind of balancing a $200 price point versus a $95 price point. So in that book, you might spend another 15 bucks on screws, so you're sitting right around like $110, $120 all said and done. So that's something to kind of weigh and measure a bit on the high end. Like I said, you can get them either on sale as well through Amazon. Sometimes they'll drop down to as low as 60 or even like 55 bucks for one of these models for the 225. They do sell a more light duty model. I haven't had my hands on that one, so I can't give you an honest opinion one way or another if that's actually worthwhile or not. So one of the cons you could say for the new unit is you can't quite stand on it. I wouldn't really put it through that test. You can put, they say, up to 450 pounds on it. It felt like I could very comfortably get up to 200 pounds on it if I carefully sat it on there and I wasn't constantly wiggling or rotating my project on top of it. And that being said, it could potentially cause more wiggles, is what I'd be worried about, is just kind of loosening the whole unit up, and you just have to constantly retighten it. If you were to constantly be moving 200 plus pounds around on the unit, if not around 300, it'd be about max for what I felt comfortable with it. If you did modify it, and if you did throw on some stronger top boards onto it, because the new one's kind of flexed. This board, as you saw with me standing on it, I'm getting no flex out of it by putting all my body weight onto it. So I feel very confident to just leave a project going like this that weighs a whole bunch and that I wouldn't split these right away. If I was constantly banging that product or project that I was working on top of this in the dead center, it would mar up and eventually damage the wood, but I still wouldn't really worry about it just splitting under the sheer weight of whatever I put on here. The new one, I could push really hard and it would start flexing. So it still took quite a bit of effort for me to get it to flex, but I could flex it just by pushing down in the dead center of it. So the top boards were a little bit more of flimsy build, so they didn't quite use as good of a material, but in the modern era they're going to try to stretch it and make as much profit as possible essentially. So I can't really knock them for doing that, but it does suck that something that is old school and bulletproof kind of got lessened a little bit in quality. So keep that in mind and keep an eye out. If you feel you can find a new one for cheaper and you can modify it and you're fine with that idea of purchasing it and knowing you're going to modify it, you can make something that's going to be phenomenal and it'll last you a lifetime. If not many lifetimes, as an heirloom to be passed down to your kids type deal, which is what this old school one was. The new one, when collapsed, is just a little bit thinner, so it takes up just a little less space. If that is something that is an absolute premium to you and actually matters quite a bit more, I would suggest potentially going with the new one if you really need that extra space. And like I said earlier, you're on a budget and you don't mind doing a little modification, and this one is not readily available or seen for under 200 bucks on eBay. That's one option to look at. Plus also you got, I think, $45 to $80 in shipping and handling sometimes for some of these, because not all those postings have free shipping, so keep that in mind too. $200 price tag might quickly become closer to $300, all said and done with tax and shipping and handling. So con, as opposing to that one, for the old one, is that it does take up just a bit more space versus the new one takes up just a little less space. So stuff to keep in mind. The old one is solid, whether it is in the closed state or open state. This thing is a tank, and even when you collapse it, it's solid, it's right there. When you have it open, this thing is solid, and except for this side, which you need to tighten, the thing does not wiggle for the frame underneath. The only thing that wiggles on top is purely, like I said, I need to tighten the 2 screws underneath. And then this would be solid to these threads, but something I just haven't really thought to do until I put it out in front of you guys. So con for it, the old school swivel pegs are just a little bit smaller. It's very minute, but something to throw out there. The swivel pegs are older, and if you do get them and it is old school, there is a higher likelihood that these are either damaged or a bit more on the brittle side. So some of the hardware you might need to upgrade anyway on the old one, or if you do buy it secondhand, just like me, they're supposed to be 4 and I had 3. In your case, depending when you get it, you might have none. So kind of keep that in mind. This might be an additional, I think, 15 to 25 bucks to buy these, just a 4-pack. And that's depending on availability. There's a few websites you can look at where you can get any little component to this, but you are still paying 20 plus bucks per little handle, little screw, any of that. So if you do buy one of these in really bad disrepair, you might still end up racking up high enough of a bill that you might just end up modifying a new one, and it would be in the same boat or still ahead. For the old one, until I kind of broke it in, one of the cons I will say is that some of the pieces do, just by the nature of opening and closing, kind of end up pinching itself as you open it up. So in here you have two little arms that you can click. Just as you saw, kind of sticks and binds a little bit as it goes up and down, but it's something that you can do a simple, what I like to call fluff and buff, term that I've had from prior managers and some others who kind of taught me. But you just go through, lightly sand and buff the surfaces that rub and have consistent contact, and you can use some grease or some even like graphite and just put it in there, and it'll end up making it very smooth. And as it transforms and kind of goes out and closed, it'll actually smooth all of that out. But otherwise, a lot of the times on the old ones, if you don't pull it just straight, or sometimes as you're pulling it, one side will kind of go before the other one and it'll bind a little bit. So you gotta kind of wiggle and work with the old school one a bit. The new one is very smooth, and it opens up and collapses very smoothly. But in either formation of it, there is just a little bit of a wiggle. If you modify it, throw a couple extra washers in there, tighten down, or swap some of the bolts out, you can make that thing absolutely amazing, but you have to put in the work for it. So keep that in mind. By that same virtue of old school versus new, this one is a few pounds heavier than the other one. The new model boasts that it's around 28 pounds. This one, I'd venture to guess, is at least 35, if not more. Probably around 38 plus. You're looking around a 10-pound difference, because this is noticeable when you're hefting it and moving it. So if you are on a job site, this will have the strength you need, but just be willing to sacrifice an extra 10 plus pounds of moving around the workshop. And if you were to put this in a place that it mounts nicely on the wall, but you have to lean over something, just keep in mind that 38 pounds, roughly, is still something very heavy when you're lifting it outright to get over something, to bring it towards you, to then work in your shop with it. So if you do end up getting the old school version, just kind of keep that in mind. It is heavy, and if you are in a tight area and your budget for space is very limited, you could say, it would be nice, but if you're constantly having to lift this over a bandsaw, table saw, chop saw, lathe, any of that, to use it, you're going to wear yourself out more with an old model versus the new model. Alright, so two final notes to end on here, something I could have started out with a little bit more. The reason there is such a definitive change between the old school models versus the new school models happened back in 2010, namely. The company Black & Decker actually merged with Stanley Tools, Stanley Hand Tools to be more precise. So Stanley Hand Tools merged with Black & Decker for most of their lines. Some of the contracts are a little bit more in gray area for that, but this is actually one of the tools. You can see it on Amazon and a variety of other sites as well state this information and facts. But as those two merged, they looked at a few different things to kind of see for profit sharing what would make more money. And of course, with everything, more money means cheaper in one regard or another. Sadly, a few little quality things on this particular product ended up being the victim of that. So in order to help boost sales, they lessen prices a little bit, but lessen quality a bit more than that to be able to fit their new budgets. So that's where some of these parts may still end up needing machined. There is a few components on the interior of this, so the inside of your vise on the new ones, that are very sharp. A lot of it was pressed steel and cut very quickly. They didn't actually round or sand any of the components, so you may get sharp steel edges. So keep that in mind. Some of that is in the same area, like I said before, a fluff and buff. Just kind of sand it down, make it very smooth, make it very clean, oil it up, throw a couple extra washers here and there, and you'd have a very nice, very capable tool at your hands and at your disposal. But it's the work and effort, and if you're willing to put that in before feeling like you got robbed or cheated on something, it's just something to keep in mind. If it's a project that you feel is a fun weekend project, awesome, great, go for it. So as kind of like a final conclusion, it just depends on what bracket you're in. If you're somebody that wants to purchase it right out the gate, maybe you have some mild kind of like looking at the manual and it's working after that kind of fact. You could purchase an old version, watch a couple videos, or just read the manual with it if it comes with it, and just work with it right out the gate. You are going to spend a little bit more of a premium unless you can find this at a yard sale, Salvation Army, Goodwill, something like that, or a swap meet. A few of these have those, as well as like little flea markets and such. On the other hand, if you're somebody that likes to tinker, you don't want to get some old rundown rusted version that you just so happen to find for cheap and you don't want to spend all that time and effort into that labor of love to get it up and running, you could also say that the new version, with some mild modifications of a nut and bolt kit you have sitting in the side of the corner of the shop, and just put that into your mind that that's part of the assembly of the new tool. They come mostly assembled, but there is still some assembly required. So that could just be something that is part of your initial setup and assembly of the tool, is you just modify and fix a few little things on it, a few little details, and you have yourself the absolute tool that you wanted from the get-go. They're still great products. I won't really knock that in any regard. And the vices themselves, even with having a few things non-modified, work great for holding a chop saw, a planer, and they do have a good weight capacity on them. Anything that if you are trying to reform a large bar of steel, only I'd really throw this one at it, and even this one is still getting taxed a bit on it, but it could do it. New version, I wouldn't really risk it because you're probably going to end up damaging it and losing 95 bucks, or you're going to have to spend a good 30 in new steel and remake it yourself. If you have the tools and capability is the other question on that one. Hopefully this has been a nice little insight and kind of idea into what a Black & Decker Workmate is, and just kind of some different buying ideas and what your approach will be on it. There might be a few people on this channel that have actually had these in the past, know what they are exactly, love them to death, but haven't even looked at the new ones. So before you look at purchasing a new one because your old one's finally getting wore out and you want to upgrade it, kind of keep these thoughts in mind. There needs to be some modification, but it could still be a great tool. So hopefully you all enjoyed. If you did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe as well. Helps me out greatly. If you want to get updates on any of the new stuff I'm coming out with, be sure to hit the notification bell. Costs you nothing, helps me out greatly, and thank you all so very much. Have yourself a wonderful day.